Thank you very much. And journalists do indeed have their work cut out for them here. In fact, a short while ago, Sbu, we were at that briefing where the IEC was briefing the media about the state of affairs around the country. I don't know if it was me. I did get a sense, though, that they weren't as comfortable as they perhaps should be when all of us raised questions about what was going on around the country, from hearing that, of course, from our teams of journalists, but also from people who give us feedback. Just your sense.
I think the anxiety is actually quite understandable given the magnitude and the importance of this election. And I think that because you also have an IEC that is confirming that we are going to have a much higher voter turnout this election than we did in 2019. I think in 2019 we had about 66% voter turnout. I think the IEC understands that the credibility of this election hinges on their ability to deliver what is considered a free and a fair election. And of course, no one expects a glitch-free election. But at the very least, if you have the majority of the voting population coming out in large numbers, at least they should be able to get that opportunity to vote. And we still hear from our various teams that there are still queues that are out there. And I asked this question of the IEC CEO, whether these long queues are as a result of high voter turnout or because of the delays as a result of the glitches with their VMD machines. And he attributed it to the high voter turnout. But the reality is, the IEC has to be able to ensure that everyone who's still standing out in queues is able to do so. And we know that this is South Africa, which is also a dangerous country, a violent country. And if you still have people who are out there in the streets in a violent country as ours, are the police able to secure and ensure that those people are free from harm, from criminal elements who will be opportunistic? So I think those are the questions that we still have to ask. And of course, as journalists, we are worried about our colleagues because they do become easy targets when covering such events in various communities.
Ask me about it. You know, and I mean, the point really a lot of people are making was that, I mean, it's something they ought to have prepared for. But of course, they are also victims of other people's decisions and actions. For example, the whole thing that you can only vote at a station where you registered, unless, of course, you make prior arrangements, which some people simply cannot make. And one example I was citing, a couple of people who had to go all the way out of the province only to find that they actually should have voted here. And those decisions were decisions that politicians actually took when they changed the law. And all of that is, of course, easily forgotten. And interestingly, it is actually the politicians who are now crying foul or worried that this is going to cost them votes.
Well, I think it's in the true nature of politics, in that politicians blame everyone but themselves. And also you do realize that the IEC has been making the point that actually with every election, their mandate, they are underfunded. Parliament keeps voting lesser budgets for the IEC, and while the work is actually growing. So it makes no sense at all. And as you are saying, it is actually the political parties who said that the idea that people can vote anywhere gives rise to risks of double voting, and actually passed the law that changed. And I guess now it affects them. They will cry foul. But I think another issue, though, has been not enough messaging. I don't think there's been enough messaging in terms of, and I'm sorry, I'll make this point. There is a statement that was issued by the IEC on the 25th of May. That statement said, if you you can vote at any station in the province where you are registered. And I guess that makes sense because your regional ballot and provincial ballot affects not your local voting station as it does in a local government election, but it affects the province. That makes sense. But you cannot vote. The Section 24 applied to people who are moving province to province. But now if you listen to Mr. Shibura, I listened to Mr. Shibura earlier today, and he still says, no, people must vote at the voting station where they are registered. And I thought that was a bit of mixed messaging on the part of the IEC.
But that used to be the case before, I mean, if you remember, but that was
Yes.
changed. But it was changed by the legislators and not by the IEC.
Yeah.
As a confusion
Sure.
around the 24-hour cooling period.
That's it.
I mean, 48-hour cooling period and all of that. But speaking of credibility and decisions, you guys at Sanef have been warning, the media fraternity around the issues of polling. In fact, a short while ago, before you and I came and stood here, the head of the ANC's media subcommittee was saying he wants to challenge me to a studio discussion once results, are out, so that because they are convinced that they are going to approve the critics, but also, or more importantly, the pollsters, that they are wrong, in this election. And this is an issue you are seized with as a Sanef, to warn all of us, say, look, we need to be very circumspect in how we're dealing with the issue of polling, because whatever we would have said up until now, if the results of this election, go way against what we have been saying or talking about, then our credibility is at stake, isn't it?
I think it's two things. One, everyone likes polls for as long as they suit their outcome, right? In terms
as long
of
as they give a story.
Exactly. But the second point is that this is an election that is like no other. I think you have the highest number of new parties that are contesting at a provincial and the national election. And we've seen from history that kind of throws things up in the air. But I think with this election, there's also, not only have political parties grown, but the number of polling companies emerging has equally grown. But what has been missing is some of the methodology that has been used by these companies to get to their conclusions. Because, for instance, when you do a poll, you say that I interviewed 5 people living in northern Johannesburg, and this is what they said. So if you are able then as a media house and as a journalist, you are able to discern from that who lives in northern Johannesburg, and if it's 5 people, where are those likely from? So you're able to discount things and work out how credible that study is based on that information. So the concern from our part was actually the emergence of new companies styling themselves as credible researchers, but not giving much information about how they get to the conclusions they reach. So what is important then for us, because as the media, we are the ones who are disseminating this very information, and that populations, voters and communities, they rely on our reports to actually make informed decisions about their political choices, about their futures, and about pretty much every aspect of their lives. And if we then give that information, we should be able to say, this is what Vuyo Mvoko Research Institution is saying, and we do not know how they reached that conclusion. Not to say that don't use polling companies, but be as factual as possible and give the reader or the viewer or whichever audience form you have enough information to be able to make up their mind about the source of that very information.
So let's leave it there for now. Thanks very much for your time. The chairperson of the South African National Editors Forum, of course, they have been warning the fraternity, really asking everybody to be really circumspect about how we use polls and how we report on them. And that's not to say, as Sbu said in his concluding remarks, that's not to say we shouldn't report at all on what these polls are saying, but we should really apply our minds very broadly and very deeply. It's an issue you're not going to hear the end of as soon as, of course, we begin to get those results after polling stations would have closed, and when the numbers come through that screen over there, and those politicians will feel vindicated are no doubt going to make sure that we journalists do indeed feel it. But myself and Veronica are going to be working the floor, and we are going to talk to some of those politicians who will, of course, be raising those issues and more, but also be talking about their anxieties. It's almost that time when the polling stations are going to close, reality is going to set in, and the results are going to come out. But we'll be here to report all of it for you from the rock floor. For now, though, it's back to you in studio.